Hey, political scientists and computer experts. It's your boy here, Thor Hansen, and welcome back to another political science video. Today, we're doing a viewer requested video about Conservatism Explained because I know that a lot of people are unsure about conservatism and they associate it with fascism. I am here to let you know that it is not the same thing. If you want to know about fascism, you can see one of my other videos that I will link in the description. But this is what conservatism is actually supposed to stand for and what it's actually about, and why I think the Republican Party has strayed away very much from that and turned to white Christian nationalism, which is not the same thing as conservatism. So let's get started. Conservatism in a nutshell. Conservatism is a political philosophy and ideology that emphasizes preserving traditional values while generally favoring limited government, free market economics, also known as laissez-faire economics, and a strong national defense. Conservatives believe that conservatism works for a few key reasons: limited government, laissez-faire or free market economics, traditional social values, a strong national defense, fiscal responsibility, and originalist constitutional interpretation. Key points of conservatism. The first point is limited government. Conservatives generally favor a smaller, less intrusive role for the federal government in people's lives and the economy. They often advocate for devolving more power and decision making to state and local governments, as well as to private individuals' institutions. They argue this maximizes individual liberty and economic dynamism. Conservatives are often very wary of liberalism's rapid transformative nature, which they see as introducing unnecessary risks and disruptions to society. Conservatives prefer more gradual, incremental changes that don't fundamentally upend existing structures and norms. Conservatives contend that their focus on balanced budgets, low taxes, and restraining government spending promotes fiscal responsibility and economic growth. Conservatives are weary of government-funded programs as well as entitlement programs and often prefer the privatization of the free market instead for things such as healthcare and education. Free market economics, also known as laissez-faire economics. Conservatives typically support laissez-faire/free market economic capitalism and oppose excessive government regulation and intervention in the economy, as they argue this stifles economic growth and entrepreneurship. They believe in the power of market forces to allocate resources efficiently and drive economic growth. Conservatives believe that excessive government power and intervention can infringe on individual freedoms and the free market. They argue this approach generates more prosperity and opportunity for individuals and businesses. Keep in mind, this is just what conservatives think. This is not what I think. I am a socialist, and I think that the government needs to be regulating the market and that the market cannot function without government oversight. But conservatives want to get the government as much as they can out of the free market. And as you will see later in this presentation, you will see why that is a big problem with free market economics. Traditional social and cultural values. Conservatives tend to place a high value on traditional social institutions, such as the family and religion, and are staunchly opposed to anything that goes against traditional values, such as gay marriage, drug consumption, sex outside of marriage, and atheism. Conservatives are very often reactionary and very resistant to rapid social change and seeks to preserve long-standing cultural norms and practices. Conservatives argue that this traditional social, economic, and political institutions have developed over time and proven their worth, therefore they should stay the way that they are. They believe that preserving these time-honored arrangements provides stability, predictability, and continuity that benefits society. Strong national defense and law and order. Conservatives generally favor a robust military, tough on law enforcement, and tough on crime policies to maintain public safety and national security. They often oppose what they see as soft approaches to criminal justice and national defense and focus on criminal justice systems that focus on punishing rather than reform, and often support policies such as capital punishment as they see it as a deterrent against crime. Conservatives are staunchly opposed to the consumption of drugs and are against any efforts to legalize substances such as cannabis and LSD, and they believe that these things should be heavily criminalized. Conservatives favor security and law and order over freedom, and often favor things like gated communities, armed private security, internet censorship, and the militarization of police forces. They believe this helps protect citizens and preserve social stability of society. Fiscal responsibility. Conservatives typically prioritize balanced budgets, low taxes, and restraining government spending, with the exception of military spending, especially on social welfare programs. They see this as a distortion of the free market and a waste of resources. Conservatives are often skeptical of the growing national debt and the expansion of entitlement programs. They favor the privatization of the free market instead of entitlement programs, and often blame these programs for government deficits and see this as a frivolous form of government spending. Originalist interpretation of the Constitution. Many conservatives advocate for interpreting the U.S. Constitution based on the original intent of the framers, rather than through a more flexible, evolving lens. This distrust of the state changing the interpretation of the Constitution can influence their views on issues like gun rights, federalism, and the role of the federal government in people's lives, as well as issues like abortion and gay marriage. Conservatives believe the original interpretation of the Constitution protects core individual liberties and limits government overreach. The origins of conservatism. The origins of conservatism, Part 1. Conservatism started as a form of political thought in the 18th century during the Enlightenment period and the French Revolution. As far as we know, conservatism was a philosophy founded by British philosopher and economist Edmund Burke as his response as a staunch critic of the French Revolution. His key points were as follows. Opposition to the French Revolution. Burke was a strong critic of the French Revolution, which he saw as a dangerous and destructive force that threatened the established social and political order of European monarchies. In his seminal work, Reflections on the Revolution in France, he warned against the excesses of revolutionary change and the tendency of revolutionaries to disregard the wisdom and experience embedded in traditional institutions and social structures by economists and philosophers. Emphasis on tradition and gradual change. Burke argued that society and government should evolve gradually based on the accumulated wisdom and experience of the past, rather than being subject to radical revolutionary transformations, as he thought this upsetted social stability and the balance of society. Burke believed that established institutions, customs, and social hierarchies should be respected and preserved, as they embodied the collective knowledge and values of generations. Part 2. Rejection of rationalist abstraction. Burke criticized the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason and abstract universal principles, which he saw as a dangerous departure from the practical realities of human experience and the complexities of social and political life. He emphasized the importance of understanding the context-specific nature of political and social issues rather than relying on universal rational solutions. Organic view of society. Burke conceived that society is an organic living entity with deep roots in the past and continuous evolution over time. It is a gradual evolution, not a system for radical change. He rejected the idea that society could be redesigned from scratch based on the whims of a few individuals or a revolutionary movement, arguing that such attempts would disrupt the delicate balance and interdependence of social institutions and traditions. Limits of reason and the role of sentiment. Burke recognized the importance of sentiment, emotion, and tradition in shaping human behavior and social institutions, in contrast to the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason and rational self-interest. He argued that reason alone was insufficient as a guide for political and social action, and that sentiment, custom, and established practices played a crucial role in maintaining social stability and cohesion. The key figures in conservatism. Key figures Part 1. Edmund Burke. We just talked about him. Often considered the philosophical founder of modern conservatism, Burke advocated for gradual organic change over radical upheaval. Russell Kirk, a prominent 20th century conservative thinker who articulated traditional conservatism's emphasis on ordered liberty, organic social institutions, and skepticism of radical change. William F. Buckley, the founder of the influential National Review magazine and a leading voice in the modern conservative movement. Ronald Reagan, the 40th U.S. president. Reagan championed conservative policies like tax cuts, deregulation, and a strong national defense. Margaret Thatcher, the first female prime minister of the UK. Thatcher pursued free market economic reforms and more assertive foreign policies. Key figures part 2. Anton Scalia, a longtime Supreme Court justice who was a prominent advocate of originalist constitutional interpretation. Milton Friedman, the renowned economist whose free market ideas heavily influenced conservative economic thought. Barry Goldwater, the 1964 Republican presidential nominee whose campaign helped catalyze the modern conservative movement. Charles Krauthammer, a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and prominent conservative commentator. Mitch McConnell, our current U.S. Senate Republican leader, known for his strategic use of the legislative process. Not a big fan of Mitch McConnell. He's too damn old, and we need someone else. Again, that's just my opinion. You might like him, but that's just where I stand. How conservatism differs from modern Republicans. Conservatism versus Republicanism, Part 1. Overall, there are many differences between traditional conservatism and the direction of the modern Republican Party. The modern Republican Party has changed and taken steps towards a more authoritarian and nationalist approach, and has become increasingly polarized, and departed away from being the party of intellectuals and business elites, and has become the party appealing to white Christian nationalists. Populism and nationalism. Many modern Republicans have embraced a more populist, nationalist brand of conservatism that is more skeptical of free trade, globalization, and immigration. This contrasts heavily with traditional conservatism's focus on limited government, free markets, and incremental change. Polarization and partisanship. The modern Republican Party has become increasingly polarized and partisan, with a greater willingness to use confrontational tactics and rhetoric. This is a shift from traditional conservatives' emphasis on stability, institutions, and bipartisanship. Shifting demographic appeals. To maintain electoral relevance, the Republican Party has appealed to more white working-class voters, evangelical Christians, and rural urban areas. This represents a move away from the traditional conservative base among business elites, suburban professionals, and intellectuals. Part 2. The rejection of establishment figures. Many modern Republicans have embraced political outsiders and anti-establishment figures like Donald Trump, in contrast to traditional conservatives' deference to experienced leaders and institutions. Changing views on role of government. While traditional conservatives favored a limited federal government, more modern Republicans have supported a more expansive role for the government in areas like trade, industrial policy, and social issues. Shifts on social issues. On some social issues like LGBTQ plus rights and immigration, the Republican Party has shifted further to the right compared to its more moderate traditional stance. The problems of conservatism. Part 1. While conservatism has many adherents and has made important contributions, there are also some significant criticisms and problems associated with conservative ideologies. Resistance to necessary change. The conservative emphasis on preserving tradition and institutions can make them reactionary to needed social, economic, and political reforms. Reactionary means a person or political party that is extremely resistant to any sort of change or reform. This can lead to the perpetuation of inequalities, injustices, and outdated practices. Exclusion of marginalized groups. Conservative policies and priorities have historically tended to favor the interests of dominant privileged social groups over the needs of racial ethnic minorities, women, and LGBTQ individuals, and the poor. Lack of systematic analysis. Conservatives often focus on individual responsibility and behavior rather than examining underlying systematic issues and structures. This can inhibit meaningful solutions to complex societal problems. Part 2. The rejection of expertise and empiricism. Some conservatives are skeptical of mainstream academic, scientific, and expert consensus, preferring ideological or religious sources of authority. This has the side effect of using faith rather than reason when making important informed decisions, often leading to the wrong decision being made or the one that is severely lacking. Modern conservatives have increasingly shifted towards anti-intellectualism, which has led to the rejection of evidence-based policymaking. Obstructionism and gridlock. The conservative emphasis on preserving the status quo can contribute to political gridlock and obstruction, making it difficult to address emerging challenges. Part 3. Extreme nationalism and patriotism. Certain strands of conservatism promote a narrow exclusionary conception of national identity and mistrust of outsiders and foreigners. This can undermine cosmopolitan values and global cooperation. Ethical concerns. Critics argue that conservative moral frameworks, such as a focus on traditional hierarchies and authority, can neglect ideals of equality, human rights, and social justice. The differences between conservatism and liberalism. Part 1. Conservatism versus liberalism. The role in government. Conservatives generally favor a more limited role for government, emphasizing individual liberty and free markets. Liberals tend to support a more active government that can address social and economic inequalities. Approach to change. Conservatives favor gradual incremental change to preserve traditional values and institutions. Liberals typically favor more open, sweeping reforms to achieve progressive goals. Economic philosophy. Conservatives prioritize free market capitalism, lower taxes, and less regulation. Liberals advocate for a greater role for government in managing the economy and providing a social safety net. Social values. Conservatives emphasize traditional social and moral norms, often grounded in religious or cultural traditions. Liberals generally support greater social and personal freedoms, including LGBTQ plus rights and multiculturalism. Part 2. Foreign policy. Conservatives tend to favor a more assertive, militaristic approach to foreign policy and national security. Liberals often favor a more focused approach that is based on diplomacy, international cooperation, and restraint in the use of military force. Conception of rights. Conservatives place a stronger emphasis on individual liberties such as property rights and freedom of speech. Liberals focus more on collective rights and addressing disparities in access to opportunities. View of human nature. Conservatives tend to have a more pessimistic view of human nature, emphasizing the need for order and traditional authority. Liberals often hold a more optimistic perspective, believing in the potential for human progress and social improvement. I'm now going to give my 2,000-word speech about conservatism and why conservatives think conservatism works. My fellow citizens, I stand before you today to make the case for why conservatism, the guiding philosophy and principles that have shaped much of our nation's history, remains the surest path to prosperous, free, and a virtuous society. At its core, conservatism is rooted in the fundamental recognition that human nature is flawed, that power is prone to corruption, and that unbridled change often yields unintended and destructive consequences. Conservatives understand that the dynamism and progress so essential to the human experience must be balanced against the stabilizing forces of tradition, limited government, and the preservation of time-tested institutions. The conservative worldview begins with a clear-eyed assessment of the human condition, one that acknowledges our innate selfishness, our capacity for short-sightedness, and our potential for creating great harm when our passions and impulses run unchecked. Across the sweep of history, we have seen how concentration of power in the hands of a few, unconstrained by moral and institutional safeguards, has led to the most egregious abuses, from the tyrannies of the past to the totalitarian nightmares of the modern age. It is precisely this recognition of human fallibility that lies at the heart of conservative commitment to limited government, the rule of law, and the dispersal of power through a vibrant civil society. Conservatives understand that unchecked growth of the state, no matter how well intentioned in its aims, poses a grave threat to individual liberty and the delicate balance of a free and flourishing social order. History has shown time and time again that when the state expands its reach into economic and social spheres, it invariably does so at the expense of fundamental rights and freedoms that are the birthright of a free people. The steady encroachment of government power, justified in the name of progress or social justice, has time and again led to the erosion of these bulwarks against tyranny. Private property rights, freedom of association, and the sanctity of individual consciousness. Conservatives therefore champion the principles of federalism, subsidiary, and decentralization, recognizing that power is best wielded at the lowest possible level, closest to the people it serves. It is the local and community level, not the distant halls of the national capital, where the needs of citizens are best understood, and where the creative energies of a free people can find their fullest expression. This is not to say that conservatives reject the role of government altogether. On the contrary, we affirm that essential functions of the state in protecting the security of the nation, upholding the rule of law, and providing a basic social safety net for the most vulnerable but we insist that these powers can be exercised with the utmost restraint, lest they become the instruments of an overbearing leviathan that crushes the life out of civil society. Conservatives also recognize that the engine of economic progress is not to be found in the grand schemes of central planners, but rather the decentralized, spontaneous order of the free market. It is the individual entrepreneur, the small business owner, the risk-taker innovator, unshackled from the dead hand of the government interference, who is the true wellspring of prosperity and social advancement. Time and time again, we've seen how heavy hand of the state, wielding the tools of taxation, regulation, and redistribution, has stifled the entrepreneurship spirit, dampened the incentives for investment and innovation, and impeded the natural workings of the market. The result has been economic stagnation, the calcification of existing power structures, and the creation of privileged classes that feed at the trough of government favors. In contrast, the conservative vision embraces the liberating power of free enterprise, the dignity of work, and the transformative power of dynamic competitive marketplace. We believe that when individuals are free to pursue their dreams, to reap the rewards of their labor, and to make choices that align with their own values and priorities, the collective prosperity of society is enhanced, not diminished. This is not to say that conservatives are blind to the need of a social safety net, or that we reject the importance of public investment in areas like infrastructure, education, scientific research, and many others, but we insist that such efforts be undertaken with a clear-eyed understanding of their limitations and trade-offs, and with a firm commitment to fiscal responsibility and the preservation of economic freedom. The conservative approach to social and cultural issues is likewise rooted in abiding respect for tradition, the preservation of time-honored institutions, and a belief in the intrinsic value of the nuclear family, religious faith, and the cultivation of individual virtue. Conservatives recognize that the foundational building blocks of a healthy society, strong families, vibrant communities, and a robust civil society are not the product of government fiat, but rather the result of voluntary associations, shared values, and self-governing traditions that emerge organically from the lived experiences of the people. It is in these vital organs of society, not the cold and impersonal reach of the state, that the true wellspring of human flourishing is to be found. And so, conservatives stand firm against the relentless march of social engineering, the erosion of time-tested cultural norms, and the corrosive individualism that has in many ways come to define the modern age. We do so not out of blind attachment to the past, but rather a recognition that the dissolution of these foundational social institutions carries with it grave consequences for the future. For when the family, the church, and the local community are hollowed out, when the bonds of shared identity and common purpose are severed, we open the door to a world of unmoored individuals adrift in the sea of uncertainty and vulnerability. It is in this void that the siren song of ideological extremism, identity politics, and the false promises of utopian social transformation find their most receptive audience. Conservatives understand that the true path to a just and virtuous society lies not in the top-down imposition of social agenda, but rather the patient cultivation of the moral, spiritual, and civic virtues that have, throughout history, sustained free and prosperous peoples. It is through the restoration of these vital wellsprings of civil society, the family, the church, the local community, that we can hope to address the most pressing challenges of our time, from the breakdown of the social fabric to the crisis of meaning and the purpose that afflicts so many in the modern age. And so, my fellow citizens, I urge you to reject the siren call of the social engineer, the utopian dreamer, and the power-hungry demagogue. Instead, embrace the timeless wisdom of the conservative tradition, a tradition that recognizes the fragility of the human condition, the essential role of limited government, the liberating power of free enterprise, and the indispensable value of the institutions and virtues that have, throughout history, sustained free and flourishing societies. For it is the only by heeding the lessons of the past, by respecting the hand-won wisdom of our ancestors, and by remaining true to the enduring ideals of individual liberty, limited government, and the rule of law, that we can hope to navigate the treacherous waters of the present and secure a brighter future for ourselves and for generations to come. Thank you. God bless the United States of America. This has been Conservatism and an introduction about the subject, and I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, give me a like, feel free to subscribe, and give me a comment telling me what you thought. And this has been Thor Hansen signing out. I will see you next time. Peace out.